How should I live? How should one live?
I think one should live every day as if it's the very first and last day of their lives. In my workshop, I'll be talking about how human beings keep constantly keep living either in the future or in the past, and no one really thinks about the moment. And um, basically, we'll be discussing Eckhart Tolle, who is a German-born Canadian philosopher, and we'll be talking about his book. And we'll also be taking things from Zen Buddhism, and we'll try to find ways in which we can apply them to our practical lives. Um, Living in the moment is very interesting, and I think that's how we're supposed to live. And instead of constantly being worried about the future and the past, we can enjoy every moment and the little things in life. In my workshop, we'll be doing really interactive things, and we'll try to find ways in which the group can learn how to live in the moment and how to truly appreciate the beauty of life. Um, there's this Sanskrit quote which goes something like, um, yesterday is but a dream, tomorrow but a vision. But every day well lived makes every yesterday a dream of happiness and every tomorrow a vision of hope.
So I believe one should live without a gender, and my workshop was an interactive workshop that addressed issues about language and feminism and gender studies. And what it did was it highlighted the areas of language where we discriminate against and where we exclude people of certain sexuality and certain genders, and it proposed like viable solutions for these linguistic issues. And it was an eye opener for people to see the everyday the everyday impact of language and the impact their language had on others. And yeah.
One should not live as a speciesist, and a speciesist is someone who treats or considers animals differently in ethics than humans. And one should not live as a species because there are no reasons to consider animals differently than humans in ethics. And this is because our ethics should be based upon our ability to suffer and to feel pain, or happiness and enjoyment, and not based on other characteristics such as intelligence or looks or ability to do other things, because it's irrelevant to how a being should be considered and treated. My workshop was not about it was not about the rights of different animals or different humans or any sorts of things, but it was about the ethics of things. So how about the intrinsic value of beings, because you cannot give different species the same rights, because that's not what they need. For example, it's the same as saying that you would give a dog the right to vote, like humans. That would be stupid. That's giving two beings the same rights that they don't need. But what I was talking about in my workshop was the intrinsic value that we assign to beings and the ethics in which we consider them.
One should live mathematically. Mathematics helps us to achieve consistency in our justification and brings clarity to our minds, to our thoughts, and that's something that is needed for one to live well.
So in our workshop we used examples from different schools of thought, and we show that there are similarities between maths and ethics, especially in the way that derive conclusions starting from certain sets of axioms, and they use similar ways to prove, to come up with certain conclusions and solutions to the problems. We also showed throughout our workshop by examples, by comparing the examples of proving mathematical proof and of ethical proof, that both disciplines are discovered, that they have normative properties, and basically what we proved is that using that consistency and rigor in maths that maths teaches us, using that in ethics, we can derive with true conclusions and live properly.
And at the end of our workshop, we concluded three things. The first thing was that math and ethics are both derived from self-evident axiom. The second conclusion was that they are both independent of empirical evidence. And lastly, we concluded that they are also both ontologically similar.
I think one should live autonomously, and that's my answer to how should one live. I think that the quote that most exemplifies this is one by Mark Twain, and that is, "I've never let schooling interfere with my education." My topic for my workshop is about education, and during my workshop I argued for a progressive form of education and against a traditional form. This is largely because I think that the methods of traditional education, and these are the methods that we see largely in schools today, are very, very outdated, and they don't teach students how to live autonomously. I think that the whole process of teaching, by lectures, by assigning homework maybe, by controlling students' lives through timetables, through set curriculum, does not allow students in any way to make choices for themselves. And then this then means that students have never learned how to live autonomously and cannot. I think the importance of this is that autonomous individuals are necessary in a society. If we believe in democratic values and democracy as some sort of ideal, if we don't have an educated and also autonomous populace, then we can never truly have a functional democracy. Ultimately, I think that education is probably one of the most ignored problems worldwide and one of the most important, precisely because education is the perpetuation of society. And so everything that goes wrong now, if we don't change it with regards to our education system, it will go wrong in the future. And that's my workshop. Thank you.
One should live to make oneself happy without pursuing happiness. My workshop evaluated theories that claim that human actions can only be motivated by self-interest. Criticisms to altruism and egoism were analyzed in order to conclude that we shouldn't be moral saints or egoists, but rather somewhere in between them.
One should leave open. We want everyone to say after this workshop that we are not determined by the outside world. Not that anything acts upon us, but in the contrary is that we are from the outside from the beginning, and we are open to the world.
In the workshop we did an activity. We labeled people, and this activity should make people aware of how we naturally have these preconceptions. After this we try to explore the path where why do people have this preconception, why they judge, and after we went to a path as like prejudice and what the function of prejudice and discrimination, how do someone get there, and after this we trying to make people realize that we should have the power to change and be open for this change.
One should live one with nature, and in my workshop we explore the functioning of the mind, analyzing the I, the ego and the superego, and how society is really involved with these three main functionings of the nature, of the mind. and therefore we got in touch with the egocentrism of society towards the process that we basically depend on, and this show us in the workshop that as a society we are still trying to look for a more ego and not that the egocentric view that we have nowadays towards the process that actually feed us. We should try to behave and do and act as a society in a way that that we actually understand what are the effects that we have in nature and why we are that linked to nature and why nature is that linked to us. So in our workshop we did analyze the process of the functioning of mind in a more as a society. So therefore we achieved the balance of how to live with nature.
My focus is that a government cannot tell you how one should live. But of all government forms, I would say possibly liberal democracy is the best form of government to tell one how one should live. My workshop was based on two aspects, actually. The first aspect was that governments can never be neutral, that whatever a government does in its constitution, its laws, always will tell one how to live. There will always be some sort of values, some sort of morality that tells us how one should live. So that's the first claim. The second claim of my workshop was that the best form of government in terms of how one should live is liberal democracy. Despite all its faults and its weaknesses, it's the only form where there is no absolutism, where there's no religion or some type of morality that imposes certain values, that the individual has the rights to choose. And my workshop is about looking at that particular claim and also looking at 3 different case studies which would show the difficulties of a liberal democracy in showing how one should live, but also that in the end their judgments, their values give the individual the most rights, the most liberty. And in essence, I would then say a liberal democracy has its right to tell us how one should live.
One should live through respect. My workshop, Question of Secularism, focused on the changing nature of religion and government as we live in pluralistic times. Through defining secularism, examining what makes a secular state and which states are secular, and questioning the merits of that secularism, we can answer the question of whether or not it is enough to be secular, or if we must strive and reach for something more, something concrete and not just the appearance of tolerance. Ultimately, my workshop concluded that we cannot be secular, or at least not effectively so, and that instead, all government should operate from an atheist standpoint, one that separates morality from religion, and that provides a standard for policy, instead of just a vague system of avoidance that most governments today seem to be enacting as they try to kind of bridge this gap between these two very different subjects.
So I think we should have a limited market economy and a big government that is very democratic and restrains the market in a way that, from a utilitarian perspective, it produces the best outcome. And I will look at a political and an economic system, and I will define them first. Economic system answers the question, how shall we respond to the problem of scarcity, and the political system basically determines who should hold political power. And both, I think, are inextricably intertwined, because the government sets the rules for the market and so determines the market outcome, and the market in turn nowadays influences government through donation towards parties and that kind of thing. So I look at both of them because I believe they are one unit that determine how we live in a society. And I think that's interesting because at the moment both don't really seem to work perfectly. When we look at all the technology that we have and how well everyone could live on that planet and how it really looks like, then I would say we don't have a very good outcome. And I think the reason for that is the system, the economic and the political that we live in. So I think that the market mechanism in general is a good thing. I would understand it as a machine that's really well engineered, probably in Japan or Germany, and that always takes resources, capital and money away from the less efficient parts of the economy and reallocates it to the more efficient parts of the economy, and thereby we get the most out of our resources. So that will make society overall richer, and that's a overall utilitarian argument. And I think the market is also genius in this, that everyone's self-regard is turned into a good outcome for everyone. But of course there are several problems with the market, such as what arises from externalities of production and consumption, where there's overproduction of goods that harm society in the end, or we have at the moment a phenomenon where corporations start to own everything. They have the DNA for certain plants and things like that, so that limits the possibilities of poor people can't grow their crops anymore and things like that. High-speed trading is another example. A small number of people make a lot of money, but in the end harm society overall. So I think those are things where the government should step in on utilitarian principles to make the market outcome better. And that can only be done through a democratic government, I believe. And this democratic government truly has to be democratic. So I'll introduce some changes that I would make to the democratic governments that we have at the moment.
I think that one should live impartially, and that physical and emotional borders should not have a say in whether or not we give aid to people or who we give aid to. My workshop is entitled The Dilemma of a Good Samaritan, and it's basically an evaluation of service learning in UWC Maastricht and using Peter Singer's principle of sacrifice, evaluating who we should help, why we should help those people, and whether or not we're immoral for helping people closest to us rather than emotionally and physically, rather than helping those we are able to help.
One should live as a Marxist, and my workshop was about Marxism and its use nowadays. How did we change the concept of Marxism, and how this concept got changed during the times of Soviet Union and socialism. So basically the idea was to propose different ways on different branches how the idea of Marxism got improved by different systems, and in general to present the ideas which are being nowadays attacked by different arguments. And my presentation was about, should everybody be Marxist to get the idea of Marxism, or separate people can be Marxist and like overall idea can be obliged on other members of community. So in my opinion it was that everybody shouldn't be Marxist to have the system working within the community. I gave different reasons about it, which were like that each person needs to believe in what they want to believe, but unless the system can work with ideas of everybody cannot be individual. Therefore, these individuals should come together under one idea, which I guess and I believe that the best is communism and the idea of Marxism. And also I believe in ideas of Stalin, which said that the power can be the tool to create this system. So I guess that one should live as a Marxist because the system can improve both utilitarian ideas and ideas of individuals.
So in my opinion, one should live authentically and live in the moment. Do not care about the expectations of society or anything else. In my workshop, I mainly focused on the outsider and how Meursault lives, the main character, and I tried to engage people in the way I see the book and to make them involved in the message that I wanted to get through. So I did a dramatization with the trial scene to make them aware of the fact that Meursault is a mirror and he's a threat to society because of his silence, and that's why he's being executed, because he's so different. He's going to be eliminated by society, and he's not being judged because of his crime but because of who he is, and he's just who he is. He doesn't think about it, he just is, and that's the way he lives.
One should live like a woman. In my workshop we discussed the different ethical approaches that are used by the two different genders. We discussed how males are using what is called a justice-based morality approach, and females use an ethics care approach. And we used examples to show how. We used Haynes' example, which is a moral dilemma that is very famous in psychology. And basically there is a guy who is, his wife is dying of cancer, and the only way to save her is possibly by stealing a drug. And so we discussed how the different genders would approach the problem, and the conclusion we reached was that even though it's the same moral dilemma, they approach it differently, and that was very interesting. So I believe that both men and women should adopt the ethics of care approach and live like a woman, because the ethics of care is a superior ethical approach than compared to the ethics of justice. And this is because the ethics of care actually takes into account relationships. It takes into account complexities which the ethics of justice approach ignores. And I think that as humans, and our society is so complex and has so many great grounds, that by only considering what is black and white, we can't live this way. We should live by considering relationships and compromising, and that is exactly what the ethics of care is all about.
One should live according to what makes you happy. The question is, though, what is it that makes you happy, and what is happiness? Traditionally, the West and the East have had very different perceptions of what this happiness consists of. In the Western world, where most of the time capitalism reigns, the idea of indulging in your desires and attaining what you desire will eventually lead you to the highest form of happiness. In the East, the the century-old idea of Buddhism, with its form of desireless happiness, prevails, where the people say that by being desireless, you attain a state of non-being and peacefulness that eventually leads to ultimate happiness. In our workshop, we discussed the different ideas and contrasted them with each other. We presented different case studies where the participants could then discuss and evaluate whether they thought the Eastern approach to happiness was more valid or the Western approach to happiness was more valid. Finally, at the end of the workshop, after we had discussed everything, we came to a conclusion where perhaps both forms of happiness are valid, but striving towards the Eastern form of happiness will provide a more sustainable form of happiness with less pain in between in your life.